Hi guys, I'm back to talk about the Freud stages of psychosexual development. Freud thought that, can I just tell you, it's easier to deliver this lecture by a video than seeing your faces. I'll just imagine the eye rolling that's going to go on when you watch this. So anyway, Freud was controversial at the time. His theory is still a little bit out there to us, but he talked about each stage of human development being based on a child's erogenous zone, so the source of pleasurable sensations, but also where conflict arises. And if that conflict isn't resolved, it results in fixation of energy. Freud's the one that coined the term libido, a term that now we use in reference to sex drive, but Freud meant it as the energy that we're born with that drives the personality and personality development. And so if a stage doesn't go well, some of that energy gets stuck and fixated there, and there's less energy to drive the personality through successful future stages of development. So just kind of keeping that in mind. The first stage that Freud talked about was the oral stage, so from birth to about 12 or 18 months. So at the time that Freud developed this theory, remember that most kids were being nursed. There wasn't baby formula. And so, and again, I think I mentioned this before, these early psychologists, particularly Freud, if ever anything went wrong or you weren't completely psychologically healthy, it was definitely your mother's fault. So Freud thought that too much or too little oral gratification, because again, at this stage, the mouth is the center, the focus of sexual or what essentially just pleasurable sensations. Too much gratification or too little gratification could lead to an oral fixation. And this can go in either direction. So it may manifest as a preoccupation with oral behavior. So it may be people that talk too much, oops, people that chew their fingernails, people that eat too much, people that go around kissing everybody, people that drink a lot, those kinds of things, but also as personality characteristics. So people who are very dependent, very optimistic, very gullible. In other words, we have an expression for that. They'll swallow anything, relates back to this theory. Or on the other end of the spectrum, extreme pessimism, hostility, sarcasm. These are, if you're going to extend that analogy, people that spit everything back out. The second stage is about, Freud called the anal stage. And this is from 12 to 18 months, a year and a half to about 3 years. And typically this is when kids are being potty trained. And Freud thought that kids at this stage derive pleasure from either withholding or expelling feces. I know, bear with me. And that going through potty training involved having to delay gratification. So he said that kids can rebel. They may rebel and defecate everywhere. And so maybe you've known a kid like this. Maybe this was you. The kid who, when their parents are trying, or somebody's trying to potty train them, they, sneak off behind the couch and poop behind the couch, or, any number of things. Or, and Freud said that the personality characteristics associated with that are what he called an anal expulsive personality. So people that become sloppy and irresponsible and rebellious, destructive, all those kinds of characteristics, versus the opposite, kids who rebel by withholding feces become anal retentive personalities. So they're stingy, they're stubborn, they're orderly, they're precise, they're excessively neat. It's kind of like, if you guys are familiar with The Odd Couple, Felix and Oscar, that's kind of the classic representation of an anal retentive and an anal expulsive personality. Next comes the phallic stage, and this is the age between about 3 years of age and 5 or 6. And at this point, kids learn that boys and girls have different plumbing, and they also learn that they can derive pleasure from touching their genitals. And this is when it gets really interesting, because Freud thought that this is when, you've heard of terms like an Oedipal complex or castration anxiety, those kinds of things. That's when all of this comes into play. So Freud said that when little girls discover that boys have penises and they don't, they become envious. Why does he have something that I don't have? And they develop penis envy. Now, some of the neo-Freudians that came after that, particularly women, suggested that maybe it wasn't so much the actual penis that girls were envious of, but the privileges and the power that society afforded those that had them. But I guess that's a more political conversation. We don't need to go there. So girls develop penis envy. Freud said boys could develop castration anxiety, because boys might jump to the conclusion that, wow, I have one of those and she doesn't, so she must have had one and she did something really naughty and someone came in and cut it off. So if I do something really naughty, something might happen and someone might come along and cut off my penis. So also an Oedipal complex. For those of you who are familiar with mythology, Oedipus was the character who unknowingly killed his father and married his mother. And when he discovered what he had done, he poked his eyes out. Freud said that little boys at this age fall in love with their mothers, little girls fall in love with their fathers and fantasize about, my phone just gave me an alert that the governor says schools will remain closed until at least May 15th. So there we go. That's K through 12, I'm sure. Anyway, where were we? So anecdotally, and so this is all unconscious, Freud said that boys unconsciously want to eliminate their fathers and live happily ever after with their mothers, and girls unconsciously want to eliminate their mothers and live happily ever after with their fathers. And that this is resolved by kids identifying with their same-sex parents and adopting some of their mannerisms, their kind of moral codes, those sorts of things. And this is when Freud thought the superego developed. Anecdotally, if you know kids this age between 3 and roughly 5 or 6, you may have seen them when their parents, if their parents are in a relationship, they often will, if mom and dad go to hug each other or to kiss each other or to sit next to each other on the couch, the child comes and squeezes in the middle and says, no, me. And, little girls often talk about when they grow up, they're going to marry their daddies and all of those sorts of things, that Freud would relate to those kinds of behaviors that are really pretty common to this particular stage. Freud thought that the failure to resolve this stage of development led to tremendous guilt and anxiety and problems with sexuality and the ability to relate to the opposite sex. And really this begins to really reflect the difference in our culture and our understanding of human sexuality then compared to now, because Freud thought that it was problems in this particular area of this particular stage of psychosexual development that resulted in homosexuality. So next, thank goodness, comes the latency stage. And this is from the age of 5 or 6 to puberty. And Freud said at this stage, sexual instinct is really tabled. And this is when, kids tend to think that kids of the opposite sex have cooties and they play with their own age mates and same-sex peers. And they really sublimate that sexual energy into school and play. And then around the time that puberty hits, Freud said kids move into the genital stage, where sexual energy shifts to the opposite sex and culminates in the attainment of full adult sexuality. So if Freud was here and we could ask him what are the 2 main contributors to personality development, he would say, number 1, fixations that develop during the psychosexual stages that we've just talked about, and number 2, the relative strengths of the id, the ego, and the superego. We talked about those yesterday. And I forgot to encourage you to think about people that you know that have relatively strong ids. So they're not particularly gifted or whatever, they don't spend a lot of time considering long-term consequences and how things are going to play out. And other people who have overly developed superegos that are always very much concerned with doing the right thing, never kind of let their hair down, relax, have fun, that sort of thing. And then most people someplace along the continuum in the middle. Freud thought that in order to be healthy, we have to have a balance between the id, the ego, and the superego. All right, I think that's it for today. We'll come back tomorrow and talk about some other theories of personality development. Hang in there. Hope you guys are doing well. See you soon.